So, hello, Robert. I'm so glad that we finally can see each other and have this chat together today. Robert, because, you know, would you mind introducing yourself with all the work that you're doing? I think I couldn't capture it as well as you do.
Well, Catherine, it's lovely to see you again. And we had some joyful days working together at Mercer. So it's lovely to sort of see you again and be talking about this. Obviously, things have moved on for both of us. I'm now running my own business since January 2020, really advising companies on how to become more diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And what that often takes the shape of is running workshops for boards or executive teams or workshop for leadership groups around why the imperative for inclusion, why the imperative for gender equality, how it can help them in their business, how it can help them as individual leaders as well. So that's kind of like my kind of day job, as it were, running my own business doing that. But at the same time, I've always been interested in the contribution that we can make, men as allies, as it were. And so I've been on the board now for quite some years of various women's networks. So I'm on the board of One Loud Voice for Women, which is a women's network in the UK. I'm on the board of European Women on Boards, and I'm now recently on the board of UN Women UK. So as well as sort of doing consulting work with clients, I'm also doing a lot of what I call pro bono support in the whole field of gender equality. So, I'm delighted to be here with you today because we're going to talk about leadership, which is a very critical aspect of how we drive change, and of course, how we get more gender equality in organizations. So these are two topics really close to my heart, and I'm glad we're able to have this session talking about them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Um, y- you know, because you were talking about leaders, have you seen the role of leaders evolve over the years or the recent times, and particularly in promoting diversity and inclusion, especially in these very, how should I say, turbulent times when it comes to politics, etc.?
Well, absolutely. I think the first thing to say, I think there is now a recognition, general or growing recognition, that kind of hero leadership, the way that leadership used to happen, which is the leader had all the answers. The leader was this supremely all-powerful person. I think that myth is really rapidly disappearing and kind of needs to be killed off. And part of that is around a recognition now that one of the very important factors in business is the workplace and the workforce and diversity and inclusion to get the best talent into the workforce. So I think it's become a very legitimate concern now for leadership, how diversity and inclusion happens in the organization. And I think also now leaders are starting to be more aware of the benefits for them in their own leadership skills and styles of getting involved in this work. And we'll come back to it a bit more, maybe a little bit later on. But I think actually leaders really do benefit from this work. And actually companies are now starting to want to recruit only leaders that know how to do this inclusion and diversity stuff. So I think what we're seeing really now is a demand from companies for leaders that can do this better. And I think we're also seeing more recognition from leaders themselves now that this is an important issue. And of course, there's a recognition that allyship plays a role here, that the leader can be the key ally, as it were, to all underrepresented groups in the workplace and can foster that sense of allyship and inclusion in the organization. So yes, I think the short answer is over the last 20 years or so, I've seen a phenomenal evolution in this, and it's really it's really so rewarding now to work with leaders that truly get this and are really driving change in their organizations. And I'm delighted to be working with some of those leaders who really recognize that they have a very clear role in driving diversity and inclusion in their organization.
Wonderful. This leads me now to two additional questions, because I took some notes about what I wanted to talk with you, but because you mentioned now 3 times inclusion before diversity. Do you think that we need first to have an inclusive mindset before we can put in place diversity and inclusion? Or is diversity the first thing you need to have to build inclusion?
Wow, that's a really great question, isn't it? Sort of chicken and egg question almost. I think having a mindset that basically, and we'll probably come back to this, but having a mindset where you're curious about others, where you're curious about how to do things differently with the contribution of others, I think is a critical aspect of building diversity and inclusion in an organization, because what you're building up in your own mind is the importance of having diverse contributions. And then
Hmm.
typically what happens is you look around and you see, oh my gosh, within our organization, we're really not diverse at all. We tend to be recruiting from the same places. We tend to be recruiting the same types of people. And therefore, we need to build that diversity, especially, of course, also if we're in a culture and an environment where the society is diverse. So there's a disconnect if we're not careful between who we have in the workplace and who we have in broader society. So yeah, I think in a sense, in my mind, inclusive and the inclusion mindset come first, because they enable you to build that diversity. But of course, it's good to have that diversity as well,
Yeah.
because that means then you've got the opportunity to reach out and bring people in. I mean, I do know organizations that have said to me, "Oh, we have an inclusive culture." And I look at the organization, I say, "Well, it doesn't look very diverse to me." And they say, "Well, we haven't found the people to bring in." And so it's kind of very interesting. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think inclusion, in my mind, definitely comes first.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you. Let me come back to the second question, the pressing one. With the political environment,
Oh, right.
people being pushed out of their comfort zone, and the world changing so fast that
Yeah.
it is for many of us. I mean, we can be very honest. I mean, I don't think there's one single person who doesn't feel somewhat uncomfortable with the speed of change, everything, all the parameters, everything evolving around us, and we tend as human beings to retreat and to try to protect us. Do you see that there is also in DNA, or DNI, pardon, the tendency to try to go back to the roots, to something which we all know, how it worked, how good it felt? Do you see that with regard to diversity and inclusion initiatives?
Well, it's a very interesting and important question. I think I do see some pushback, let's put it that way, against diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And of course, we see it politically in the US, for example, at the moment, and now actually in the UK, where I'm from as well, where there's this kind of anti-woke kind of
Yeah.
sentiment coming through. And you're quite right to say, yeah, the speed of change and the fact that our societies are diversifying, it does alarm some people. I mean, living in London, which is a cultural melting pot, I've got used to it. I'm, you know, delighted by all the different diverse environments and people that we have are around. So in a sense, I've been there, but other people in other parts of the world are probably a little bit more frightened about the change that comes from bringing in people that are different to them, which is why we've got all of the big fuss about immigration, for example, and,
Hmm.
and and the impact of migration. So I think, yeah, there is this worry about the speed of change. And then when you get into companies, of course, you've got men pushing back on now targets for women, for example, in leadership.
Yeah.
Men are worried that they're being discriminated against now. I've heard that a lot recently, because the targets are favoring women, when of course all we're really trying to do is level the playing field. But nevertheless, there's still that feeling that the change is going to create losers, and they don't want to be the losers, basically,
Yes. Yeah.
because they've had a situation in the past where they've generally benefited from it. So I think there is some kind of potential pushback. And then, of course, when we look at broader in the world, there are these conservative forces that are trying to realign, if you like, and be more powerful. We've got now, and TikTok. I look at that sometimes. I think, my gosh, what's going on there? The push for the trad wife, for example, traditional wife. It's like trying to push us back to the 1950s, where women stayed at
Right.
home with their kids, didn't have jobs, the husband went out to work. This is apparently a Gen Z phenomenon now on TikTok, and you sort of think, my gosh, are we going backwards? Okay. However, I think there's still a lot of optimism that I have about actually we are moving towards a more liberal or a more enlightened, a more diverse, a more inclusive environment. and we've got to continue to push on that. So, and ideally, we really need to increase the speed of change, because actually things are changing too slowly. 130 years to gender equality, that's still way too slow, if you see what I mean. So
Yes.
I think it's a very, very interesting question you raise. I think there is some pushback, but actually I think we've got to push back against the pushback and get on with the job of continuing to argue for the change that we need to see.
Are there some, or can you share some of some best practices when you develop with clients effective allyship programs that help build these diverse and inclusive workspaces?
Sure. I think the first thing to say, though, Catherine, is like we need to recognize that allyship is super important here.
Mhm.
And traditionally, allyship has been viewed as kind of men being allies to women in the workplace because women were the biggest underrepresented group, as it were. I think now the evolution of allyship is like we can be allies to LGBTQ plus or people with
Right.
disability, or we can be allies to each other, basically. I mean, I've got
Mhm.
women that are allies. I've got women that are allies to me, for example, in the way that they support me in the work that I do. But I think, traditionally we've seen men as allies programs, basically, where the men are being targeted, if you like, to become allies in the workplace. So, and those are seen as being really important because basically we still have a situation where men are 75 to 80% of the leaders globally, and sort of 60% plus of the line managers. So if we can get men engaged as allies in gender equality, then this becomes very, very powerful. And you probably saw I posted recently about an event I ran for Pfizer, and they are launching their Men as Allies program, and they want the men at Pfizer to be active allies for women in Pfizer. And that's that's often the way that these companies sort of see it. So I just wanted to flag, first of all, this is a big current initiative that's going on within a lot of companies. They're developing allyship programs with a particular focus on men being allies in the workplace. And so you asked actually about the best practices. I mean, for me, it comes to really starting from the top. It really has to be supported by the most senior leaders. And I think one of the
Mhm.
things that Pfizer did, for example, they have one of their executive leadership team sponsoring the program. So immediately, it's important to the company because you've got a member of the executive leadership team sponsoring it. And so that message gets through. I think there also needs to be a recognition that this is a multi-year journey. You're not going to suddenly change and create an
Right.
inclusive environment overnight. I mean, I'm working, for example, with Engie, the French global energy company at the moment, on this whole thing. They're in year 4 now of this program of getting their men to become allies. They're doing various cohorts, but they recognize that change does take time. And by the way, it takes a significant budget as well. I mean, don't try and do this on the cheap because it won't work. You've got to spend the money, you've got to put the effort in to run various workshops and other ways of bringing this on board. I think the other thing is we've got to recognize that people that are doing work as allies or to support allyship, that's a valuable contribution to the business. It's not something that's done on the side of the desk and doesn't go noticed or doesn't go rewarded. It's got to be counted as an important part of performance, and it should be included in the performance goals or that kind of thing. So I think that recognition that it's important to the business is very critical. And then, of course, yes, you need the high quality training programs, the leadership development programs. You need these workshops backed ideally by coaching to help support the leaders going through
Mhm.
them. And then, of course, you need the policies that enable them to be effective allies. So it's no point in me trying to be an ally if I can't take my full paternity leave, if I can't work flexibly, so I need the company to have policies that support me as an ally. And then I think the other thing that I found has really been super successful when you partner across employee resource groups. So you get the gender resource group working with the LGBTQ plus resource group, with the disability group, with the race and ethnicity group, and you share a focus on how we create this combined approach to allyship, which means it's embedded into the organization across the way that we do things, and it becomes part of the culture. So those are some of the things that I've seen with the most successful companies to drive allyship and to really drive this inclusion and the diversity that we want to see.
And I think it is the only way if we're talking about a performant organization, is to have everyone work together and also create raving fans within, and support networks within the organization, because this is basically what connects everyone to each other. And
Yeah.
it is so tremendously important. And, it raises a question for me because I've experienced men to be politically absolutely correct,
Yeah.
to follow all the principles. But as soon as the doors were closed and they were amongst themselves,
Hmm.
tone changed. Do
Yeah.
you see, and it might be also, it might be linked to fear, I mean, them losing power. And as you said, it is a long journey on how to bring people and here men to understand that it will be also beneficial for them if they get engaged and can mold, their own
Mm.
way, own style. But how do you still see that? And are we still are we still as leaders a little bit too naive in thinking that ally programship will sort everything out without, addressing also some very specific fears that some of
Yes.
these people can feel?
Yeah. No, I think we absolutely do have to address those fears. And when we look at the strategies that have proven really effective in
Mm,
engaging men in this, then listening to them, the men, their concerns. I mentioned earlier about these worries about targets for women, for example. If we don't
yes.
listen to the men that are saying, but that's a zero-sum game, that's discrimination against men, even though it's not right, we need to listen, we need to have that discussion with them. So I think, and we do need to recognize that there will be men, for example, that feel that they'd like to go back to how things were. I remember having a coaching conversation with a very honest guy a few years ago when he said to me, I really miss the days when it was just me working with other men, because I could swear
Mhm.
at them. I could call them, nasty names. I could, do things to them which I couldn't possibly do to the women that I work with, because, they'd get very, very upset. And yet as men, we were able to sort of joke with each other and be quite nasty to each other in a sort of colleague way. But I think what it is, we all have to recognize that the workplace has got more professional, and as it's got more diverse, we've got to reflect the fact that we've got people working in the organization that don't want to do things the way that things have always been done. So, for example, you might have people in your organization that don't drink for various reasons. It could be religious, or it could just be they don't drink. So if you have a culture of going down the pub or the bar after work, for example, and that's where a lot of those conversations take place, then I think that can be a bit concerning. So it's about how we when we deal with that. So
Yeah.
going back to listening to the men and their concerns and objections and issues, I think that's absolutely critical. And I think actually we've got to invite men into this conversation about gender
Hmm.
equality, because actually the thing that I say a lot is actually that gender equality is good for men as well as for women and good
Absolutely.
for all genders, right? Okay. And
Yes.
I've done a lot of research on the areas where, and we come onto that break maybe, where men really benefit from gender equality. But I did a survey a couple of years ago with a guy called Daniele Fiandaka from Token Man Consulting. We surveyed men leaders particularly about what benefits they were seeing from getting involved in inclusion and diversity work. And 97% of them said they felt that they were a better leader and a better human being as a result of doing this kind of work, because they felt they were more patient and they were more empathetic. They were able to be more authentic and even
Yes.
vulnerable about this. And they built better connections with others, and they're now more trusted by others, which made them, in a sense, even better leaders. So I think, understanding there are real benefits for men in doing this work is absolutely critical. And so that's kind of often what I lead on, and then really sort of try and help understand their motivation for even getting involved in this. I mean, in some cases, it's because they believe genuinely that it's the right thing to do. It's a concept of fairness. Others say, well, actually, I've got women in my family. I've got daughters. I want them to go into a workplace that's actually better for women than the one that I'm in now. Or they've worked with women bosses and peers, and actually, surprise, surprise, those women are really nice people and they're very, very capable people. And now actually they've broken down some of the barriers about, working with women. So it's kind of understanding what does it take to get men interested in this whole topic. How do we listen to them about what matters to them here? But let's be clear, there are real benefits for the men. Let's get that message across. There are real benefits for them. And going back to your earlier point, if you can create alumni of inclusive leaders in the organization who are held up as being successful and the leaders of today and tomorrow, then I think all of those things really get men, interested in playing a part in this. And if in addition it's supported from the top and the business is showing it's critical, then I think all those things come together to create quite an effective way of engaging men in these kind of programs.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that men can only benefit from it. I mean, would it be simply that, that younger women or younger men look up to them, and it gives a sense of you're contributing to a greater good, and
Yeah.
you're helping colleagues also to grow and to evolve within the organization. And as such, it can only consolidify their position, their leadership position within the organization. So, absolutely, I find that very beautiful the way you expressed it. So, how can leaders create and support mentorship and sponsorship programs within the organization, so that let's maybe broaden the topic, not only elevate women but elevate also younger leaders?
No, absolutely. I think, and certainly we have to get over the biases around who can be leaders. And I think that's a big issue. And we'll maybe talk about unconscious bias at another point. But I still see too many biases in the workplace about what it takes to be a leader, the kind of characteristics a leader ought to have. And a lot of people that could be brilliant leaders or contribute with brilliant ideas get ignored in a sense because they don't have the characteristics that people are looking or think are the ones that should be successful. So we have to overcome this bias that we all have towards what successful and leadership kind of looks like. And there's a
Mhm.
whole area of work there that needs to be done. But going back to your question about how leaders can create and support mentorship and sponsorship programs, I think the first thing to say is these are really important programs to have in place because they provide a route for underrepresented talent to come through into the organization and into leadership roles. And what I have found is that too many organizations have programs that are not structured. They're kind of ad hoc arrangements. So I think the first
Mhm.
thing that I would say is if you really want to be a leader being effective here, you've got to help your organization put in place a properly structured program with an expectation that people play a part in this. So for example, each leader should have a sponsorship requirement. They should, for example, be expected to sponsor at least one woman, for example, or some kind of metric, or somebody from an underrepresented group. Okay, so it needs to be structured, and there needs to be a requirement that leaders do this stuff. And then I think mentoring is also important as well, because I mean, obviously sponsorship is a much more about putting your, it's taking a little bit of a risk because you're actually nominating someone who you say has got high potential. You put them forward, you talk about them, you push them forward into great opportunities. That's kind of sponsorship. Mentoring a little bit more is kind of advising them on how to develop their careers, and it's a little bit maybe more akin to coaching, but that's also important. But again, I still find when I do presentations to companies, I ask them, how many of you in this room right now, let's say we've got a room of 200 leaders I'm speaking to, how many of you are actually mentoring somebody right now? And it's normally about 10% of the hands go up, and I say,
Mhm.
wow, you have got the biggest, lowest hanging fruit opportunity,
Yeah.
that I can possibly imagine, that 90% of you are not actually mentoring tomorrow's talent. That's crazy. How can you end up in a situation like that? And often it's because they do not have a structured program, and there's not an expectation that people do it. It's almost kind of voluntary. So, I think there's a lot that needs to be done there to make these programs much more effective and to increase the uptake on them.
So, who is your ideal uh, point of contact? Is it HR or the business leaders?
Well, I think people need to work together. So obviously, I think HR can really support a program like this because they can make sure that the right people.
Yeah.
I mean, because if we look at it from the point of view of talent development, let's say we're doing this because we want to develop high potential talent or our talent pipeline, then we need to know who that talent is. Um, but I say to each male leader that I coach, for example, think of a high potential woman in your team or someone in an underrepresented group in your team who could benefit from a little tap on the shoulder to say, hey, we think you've got what it takes to move to the next level, and that's what you should be doing. So I think there's a requirement for leaders here to play a role. They can't leave it all to HR. I think leaders have got to, they've got to know who the talent on their team is, and they've got to want to
Mhm.
sponsor and mentor that talent. But they need HR to help put the structured programs in place. Okay, and so it needs to be in concert, leadership and HR together, creating structured programs with an expectation that people participate in them, and that they're being, for example, it's tied into performance goals. Let's write in the fact that each leader will sponsor at least one person, and that'll be part of their goals.
You know, you mentioned the potential, and this is one thing that when I work with women and also female leaders, I'm telling them, if you look at the 9 grid matrix, you know, performance and or potential and versus performance, I'm always saying attention. Performance feels good and it can become a comfort zone, but it can also lead to a dead end. Because
Mm,
if I'm a leader, I want to know who can solve my problems. So I will not go to someone who is performing a wonderful, solid job. And because I mean, this person keeps off problems off my plate, I'm going to someone who has a potential to help me solve my problems. So women always look at that you go away from only being considered as a high performer or solid performer, but move into the potential. And I
mm,
think that this is definitely something where we women, it's also like the network, how we women network compared to men, and this has been also studied in many
yeah.
research papers. We tend to stay within peers, you know. I mean, because we want to solve the problems, we want to everyone happy. When men have a different way of networking, where they're looking for maybe potentially the next opportunity. So
Hmm.
they go beyond the peer network and are looking also for to get some new ideas, fresh perspective. And that is something also where I found it really important that we women we become aware of that, also that leaders are looking for the potential that we can bring to the table as female leaders.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, it's often been said that women get hired for performance and men get hired for potential,
Right.
and I think there's a lot of bias in the system about this, because when I also look at how performance is judged, often it's judged in a very male way in many
Yeah.
organizations I work with. And actually women's performance is actually downgraded because they perform in a different way. And yet actually the ways that women perform, for example, as leaders, could be even more effective if they're given the right environment. So I think we need to recognize there's bias in the system, as well as possibly individual women might be holding themselves back if they only focusing on performance. Because I
Hmm.
agree. I mean, if you really want to solve the problems of tomorrow, you need the people with the potential to help you solve the problems of tomorrow. Um, yes, you need to keep the ship afloat, or the airplane in the air. So you need that, performance, if you like. But yeah, you need to find the people with the potential to contribute for the future, which is when I come back to saying, well, actually, you need diverse voices there, because as you quite rightly said, the world is changing. It's really now much more disruptive. We've got, obviously big changes going on in the workplace with things like AI. So we need all the brain power, and just having it in one subset is not going to be good enough. And
Yeah.
and and so I think, yeah, we definitely need everybody to recognize that women have potential, just as much potential as men, and we need to give them more opportunity to show that potential. But we need to recognize that they might just do it in a different way, to the way that men have traditionally done it. And I'm even seeing younger men now coming through the workplace who want to do it differently as well. So we need to recognize that not only is the business world changing and the challenges we're trying to solve changing, but the talent we've got coming through our door now is changing in terms of the way it wants to work, the more balance it wants to have between work and life, and all of that stuff, and what it regards success. And I think there's a big change that's coming through now in terms of what younger people coming into the workforce regard as success. And there's a disconnect between the old models of success and the new models of success, which I think is creating issues that we haven't yet fully seen come out in the workplace, but will be coming out in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yes, absolutely. So, last July, or August, I had a young student of mine, a brilliant young man, asking one of the CEOs of a paper mill industry here in Europe. And he asked the CEO, what is the age for, I mean, within your company to promote younger leaders? Because I, as a younger leader, or potentially young leader, I'm 27, but I want to be part of the decision making table.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was, well, I mean, at our place, they go through an academy, leadership academy, and it's about 35 years plus onwards.
Right.
And which leads me, and it really frustrated this young man, because he was really involved, and for sure, I mean, he had his learning curve to make, and which he absolutely knows. But I was thinking about what are the skills and attributes which are the most crucial for future leaders to possess, to drive both the business success but also equity and social equity.
Yeah, wow, that's a very powerful question. Um, I mean, for me, one of the key things is kind of curiosity about
Hmm.
what's going on in the world, and the fact that what you might need to do in the future is different to what you did in the past. This whole growth mindset of learning and potential. We come back to potential again. I think that mindset is absolutely critical. And then I think you can be more open-minded about where your sources of information and the sources of great decision making come from. I mean, so I work with a number of global companies who have been developing their leadership models in the last few years, and their leadership models are changing because they recognize that the old, I called it hero leadership, but you might call it the old traditional sort of top-down leadership model, is really changing because the world is changing so fast. It's more complex now. We need more innovation. We need more resilience in organizations, and having an undiverse leadership team does not help with that. So what they recognize is they need more diversity. And I think the other thing is, of course, we're dealing with more paradoxes now. I mean, the world is more complex. So now, where things used to be a little bit more clear, black or white, now there's much more shades of gray, I think, in the world and in business generally. So you've got to be able to deal with all of these paradoxes as well. So you need that kind of mindset that can cope with that. But then I think what I'm seeing is an increasing demand for the emotional and social intelligence skills, which have
Hmm.
been downplayed a bit in the past. The soft skills, they were kind of like those nice things to have, but really the focus had to be on next quarter's financial results, But actually, what we're seeing now is those emotional and social intelligence skills are actually critical to getting the best out of the people that work in your organization. And the pandemic, I think, proved that very dramatically, that actually the leaders and the managers with the emotional and social skills to support their people did a lot better than the people that didn't show up in that way. So the models that the companies that I'm working with are developing have got a number of common features. So, for example, I was just looking actually before we came on air at the leadership model of one of the clients I'm working with, and here are some of the factors that they look for in their leaders now and expect their leaders to have. Commitment to equity and equality, for example. They see that as an important leadership attribute, if you like. Awareness of bias is another one that they say that they feel that they need. Cultural intelligence, that's vitally important in a global organization when you're working with people across countries, or even within a country where you're working across cultures. But
Hmm.
not enough leaders possess that cultural intelligence. Effective collaboration, because again, collaboration really now is the way forward rather than trying to do these things individually. I already mentioned curiosity, but I think that includes things like listening skills, because I think we still find leaders don't listen enough, and maybe they should listen more. And then things like humility, I think, are really important, i.e. not being the leader that kind of says I know it all, or actually, kind of feeling that I have to have the say all the time. It's actually about encouraging the contribution of others through that. Um, and then, of course, you need leaders that have got courage to do things differently, courage to break away from those old models of what worked, courage that they're able to take a bit of a risk and say, actually, look, let's hire somebody or let's bring in somebody who doesn't fit the traditional mold that we've had in this new role that we've got. Let's bring somebody in that does it differently. Let's be open to that. Let's be those agents of change that we need. And then I think finally, the other thing I'm seeing now, a skill that's really setting apart great leaders, is their ability to tell stories. Okay. In other
Yes.
words, your vision for what the future looks like, how you articulate that vision, the story you tell about why it matters to the organization, why it matters to you personally, and why it should matter to your teams is incredibly powerful. And I came across a leader from NG recently, a guy called Cedric Oosterreich, who's the managing director of, or was the managing director of FlexGen in Belgium. And we ran a workshop on inclusive leadership. And before I got up to give the workshop, he said, now let me tell you why this is such an important workshop. And then he proceeded to tell them why it was so important to him personally, why it was so important to the company, and why it should be important for them to pay attention and to get something out of this workshop. And it was incredibly powerful. The way he told the story about his own advantages, how he'd had them, how he'd learned the power of diversity, it was compelling. And I think, we need leaders that know how to tell those stories, that knit all this stuff together and engage people in wanting to change and go on these journeys that result in allyship, that result in more diversity and inclusion. And that's what I think we need to see more of.
Beautiful. I mean, I love everything you said. The thing I would add is that it is about the respect that you have also towards the people with whom you're working with, would
Yeah,
they be leaders or peers
yeah.
or associates. I mean, it doesn't matter. And it is also because respect for me is the ground, is the ground foundation to build trust. Because I
Mm,
mean, if you earn the trust of the people through storytelling, through sharing your emotions, your vulnerability, telling them why it is so important to you as a leader, you just know that people will stand behind you whenever you need them, and will also perform and contribute to whatever change or transformation is needed within the organization. But I think it's beautiful, and but I'm conscious of the time, and I think we are coming now today to the end. But there is definitely, I mean, if you in for it, I definitely would like to spend another time some to focus on biases,
hmm.
because this has become so tremendously important, not only in diversity and inclusion, but also the way we take our decisions and we make the decisions today.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I'd be very happy to do that. And I'm running a series of unconscious bias workshops at the moment. I just did one in Berlin a week ago for UN women, and I'm working with a big global client on unconscious bias training at the moment. It's really critical, and there are real, important ways to get it to get it right, as it were. I just want to go back and finish on the story that we were just talking about, or the storytelling, etc., and the role of respect and trust. And I think you're absolutely right about that. And I was thinking through, where does that fit in the model that I was just describing with you? I think it's very hard to collaborate effectively with others unless you had the respect for others.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a key element there. And then I think in terms of building trust, people look at what you do. So it isn't just about being able to tell stories. It's actually people being able to see you doing things differently.
Mhm.
And there's a marvelous leader, a guy called Greg Randall, who works for a company called Innocent Drinks, and they brought in paternity leave, equalized it across their organization, and he took 7 months out for paternity leave. Right? Okay, that was a message to all the men in the organization that that
Yes.
was something that I, as a leader, do. You can do it. Okay, so I think building trust is a lot about those actions and that role modeling, as well as you said, the storytelling and having the respect.
And I think that, and thank you for sharing that beautiful message. I think also that we live in times of really pretty disruptive changes, but it is such an opportunity to get creative and to be allowed to be also creative in, and then to build all these different topics, which you just explained to us on leadership, how decision making is being built. And yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert. It was again a pleasure as always. And I wish you then a wonderful continuation in all the efforts and the really important efforts you're doing. And I don't know if there's one person who can resist you, I must say.
Well, that's nice to think, Catherine. But thank you very much for inviting me on. The questions are brilliant. It's a topic, as you know, that I'm very, very passionate and interested in. So I look forward to more conversations with you. Certainly, let's have that one about bias. We both have a mission, I think, to see change, and so let's continue our journey together.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.